We are streaming. There's a few people who are still checking their phones, but most of it is people who want to record it so they can watch it later times. That's why we're neighbors and why we are streaming tonight.
We shouldn't say anything embarrassing.
Yeah, don't say anything too embarrassing. Although most of them won't hear you, so. That's why I'm sitting up here, like, so that I can be seen. Is my mic on, Scott? Or?
It is on, but I can't get anything to come out. It's all working on.
All right, maybe.
No, you're good.
Good. I think it's on. Everything I know how to do is I don't know, me. Yeah, that's right. The red light's on. It's not muted. That's the only two things I know how to do. So, let me pray for us and we'll dive in. Father, we thank you for this chance to meet. We thank you for the grace that you have showed us in Christ. And we pray now that through this book you would equip us more and more to follow after him in the course of our daily life. In Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we are obviously divided, men and women. And whenever we divide, men and women, we always know what should we do? I don't usually like men's studies that much. And so this one isn't a men's study. I think the book would be just as appropriate for women as it is for men. But this is a book that I have greatly appreciated. So I don't have my dust cover on. I want someone to hold up, right? So this one looks like if you go look at it online. We had a few copies. I think they've already sold. If you want a copy and you haven't ordered one, you can just order it yourself from Amazon, or you can have Jessica order it for you if you want to. So if you want a copy and you don't have it ordered, you can send Jessica an email and she'll get you one, and we'll have it next week. Or probably by Sunday. If you send her an email tonight, she can probably have it by Sunday.
She said that she might have a group of some more would come out there.
Oh, okay, so she has more coming on. All right, good. So, but the book is On the Road with St. Augustine. It's by a guy named James K.A. Smith, who is a professor at Calvin, I believe. He's a philosophy professor, primarily, but he's a Christian philosophy. The book delves into the world of theology as well. But because he's a philosophy professor, especially who's interested in the 19th and 20th century existentialists, some people have found the first 3 chapters hard to read. It has given me that feedback. My brother gave me that feedback. So I read this book whenever it came out, I don't remember, a couple years ago, and I was very excited about it. I recommended it to several people, and some people got back to me and said, "Are you sure?" The first few chapters are a little difficult, and so if you're struggling in the first few chapters, don't worry, we're going to do all 3 chapters tonight, and then we're going to get into the better part of the book next week, and start with chapter 4. But in the first 3 chapters, he is his philosophy professor mask comes through. He's kind of walking you through how Augustine has influenced the 20th century existentialists and all that. So if you struggle with that part, that's okay. But what he's really doing in those first parts is just sort of explaining he's really explaining what his project is, what he's trying to accomplish, what the good is that he thinks he's going to be accomplishing. And that's really what I want us to do tonight, is to think about why this book, why are we doing this book together. And like I said, for me, it's really a very personal decision. There's lots of things I find helpful. This is a book that I found that really resonated with me. I really felt like the things that he was describing, the experiences he was describing, the way he described his experience of life, really reflected my own experience. And so in some ways it reflected Augustine's experience, not because I'm an Augustine, I'm not suggesting that at all, but because Augustine's experience was a human experience. And so I really think this is something that we all probably experienced at some level. And what the way it comes through for me is with two words that sort of crop up in my subconscious regularly are failure and fraud. And I don't know if that's your experience. I would suspect it probably is. We don't talk about it a lot in public, but there are words that come out often. And so, I think people look at me externally, and I think most people say, you know what, fairly successful, I was a good student, I was a good athlete, I was successful in school, I married above my station, I have 4 healthy kids who are doing relatively well, I've had good relationships at all the churches that I've served. From an external perspective, it looks like success, but if you read my journals, you would know that the words that come up regularly are these ideas of failure, which then leads to this sense of, maybe I'm just faking it. Maybe I've just got everybody fooled. And I think we feel that, and maybe men more so, but I think women feel it too. I think Sarah would say she feels that some. But you look at yourself and you say, look at my marriage. I'm a husband, but I know the truth about the ways I fall short, the ways I fail to love my wife, the ways that I fail to give myself for her. I'm well aware of my shortcomings, painfully aware. I'm well aware of my failures as a father, the ways that I have failed to bring up my children in the instruction and the discipline of the Lord, the ways that I haven't modeled before them what true self-sacrificing love looks like. They've seen me at my worst, and I'm aware of that. And even at the church, I'm aware of the ways that I'm like, I think anybody could have done what I did that was beneficial, and there's lots of things I could have done that I didn't do because of who I am and my initial shortcomings. And you tend to become very aware of the fact that you're falling short. And that's true, not just in the external, but it's even true even in your relationship with the Lord. I'm a pastor, and yet I often feel like, I don't think my relationship with the Lord is what it should be. It feels dry, it feels distant, it feels cold. This isn't what it's supposed to be, And so in all of those ways, you begin to experience sort of that existential angst of life. And it's that experience that I think makes people want to hit the road, which is sort of the analogy for this book. Where you're saying, I need to go find something to fill me up. I need to go find something to either distract me from the failure or compensate for it. All right? And that's why people go and hit the road. So he says, he says that there's a million reasons, but we all leave. So he says at the very beginning, he says that there's a million reasons, but we all leave because all of us have experienced that sense of falling short, of faking it, of wearing a mask, and saying, I need to go find life somewhere. All right? And that's really what this book is about, is that sort of universal sense of chasing these things, the things that we think life consists of. And of course, Augustine did that, and he's going to be our guide for this whole book. That's what Augustine's Confessions. How many of you have read Augustine's Confessions? All right, Augustine's Confessions is sort of a classic. I'm actually reading. I've never read before the translation he uses in this book, so I bought it. It's not too expensive on Kindle. I'm used to kind of older translation, and so the lady who did this translation has updated it a little bit, made it a little bit easier to read. And so it's kind of a fun way to get a fresh look at Augustine's Confessions, because you hear some of the quotes in here, and you're like, that's not the way I remember that, because she's updated the language a little bit. But anyway, it's if you haven't read his Confessions, it might be worth it. The translation he's using is an easier to read translation. And if you tried maybe in the past and you got caught up on the King James language of some of the mid-20th century translations, the translations he puts in the footnotes is definitely a little bit easier to read. But he says on page 4, he says, the road offers an unending ribbon of sights and stop-offs whose flashing billboards promise exactly what you're looking for.
He says the road promises happiness, it promises satisfaction, it promises joy. But of course, it never delivers. Rather, what happens is, he says the road has a strange way of showing you what looks like a destination in the distance, but then when you get there, it points to another destination beyond it. It's like, you're almost there. Just one more stop. Just a little higher, just a little farther. He says, so just when you think that friendship or wealth or family or influence or whatever it was you would set your heart on, he says, just when you think that that's your ultimate destination, he said, you're not there long before the place starts to dim. You remember that phrase that Peter uses in 1 Peter? He says, we have an inheritance that is unfading. That unfading glory of our inheritance. Well, he says the road is not that. The road is not unfading. The road dims. And it sometimes dims fairly quickly. The thing you think is going to fill you up. The thing you think is going to give you significance and rest and contentment. He says it quickly dims. And he says, and you won't admit it to yourself for a while. He says, after all, you told everybody you had arrived. He says, but at some point, you'll finally get honest with yourself, and the disappointment will eventually turn into disdain, and you'll move on, looking for the next thing. And I just want to kind of open it up and say, I've experienced that in my life. And I think I've probably experienced it more intensely since I turned 40. But I think I was experiencing it with more denial before I was 40, probably. But since I turned 40, that was a bigger thing for me than I thought it was going to be, turning 40. I thought, oh, it's just a number. When I was in my 30s, I was like, oh, it won't matter. So when I actually turned 40, I was like, oh, this is more weighty than I thought it was going to be. And I've experienced this. And I think that's why this book just resonated. I just wonder, is this experience as common as I think it is? Have you guys, is this something that you feel? Is this something that resonates with you guys? Yeah, you told me this the other day. Yeah, people in their 50s actually are more content than people in their 40s. But I think partly that is because people in their 40s are really maybe for the first time acknowledging to themselves that the things they thought were going to fill them up aren't.
No, and I do think, I think I had that same kind of experience, and I still do from time to time, but it's more like I had to go through a period where I had to acknowledge that all of the things that I thought I was going to be or accomplish, or that I was going to find this kind of satisfaction and haven't panned out and are not likely to anymore. Yeah. And so you have to figure out a way to process your life that doesn't require that.
Yeah.
And books like this really help, I think, to think about that. And it's not like I'm all there, but it's. But I do think that I'm experiencing it differently now at this season of my life than I did 10 years ago.
Yeah. Others?
It seems like there's sort of a piece, as you start to sort of realize this, you still sort of have that within you going, no, I think I can just push a little harder. So you end up almost like burning out the last year reserve at double speed as you just get that sense of, I'm in my 40s, I can push, I still got it, and then it still just remains just that little bit extra out of the way. And that's what seems to maybe the crash is that you don't really pay much attention to it, and then as you become aware, you start grasping harder and harder and harder. It's just a little bit more elusive, and then you just run out of energy all at once. But it kind of seems like,
Yeah.
Because I've definitely seen it. And just, as some pieces start to display that, others are still sort of seen within your grasp, and you're just like, well, I must just be looking at this wrong. Maybe it's just those that are not going to get anywhere and still get leads. And as that field narrows, it becomes discouraging because you start thinking, well, I've based the last 20 years of my life on this assumption.
Yeah.
It feels sort of naked and raw. And I
And you think of Jesus talking about, the Gentiles run after these things, right? And I would say, definitely in my 20s, probably in my 30s, I had no sense that described me at all. Like, well, I'm smart for that. I don't want these things. And then I realized, wait a second, maybe I do, And I mean, for me, it was definitely a staged process. Like the things I thought I would accomplish, the things I thought I would do when I was in college. I think I was just sure. Well, of course I'll accomplish that. Probably before I'm 30. And then you start to realize, well, no, life doesn't really work that way. Those things, those sort of crazy aspirations, they'll probably never be realized. But that's okay, because I'm going to do these other things, And so you kind of readjust your goals, but you're still chasing after these things. You still think, okay, and there's a sense in which, I can remember having that sense of where, okay, I'm no longer preparing for life. That was one of the big thoughts that came to me when I turned 40 was, everything else I'd been doing at that point in my life was preparing for life. I was going to school, I was training. I'm just a new pastor. I'm still kind of learning how to do that. And then I was like, you know what? I've been here for like 8 years. I can't really say I'm just kind of training anymore. This is kind of me,
Yeah, we laughed about that once. We were in a Presbyterian meeting. We were trying to sort through this, sticky problem, and we were we both had the impulse of we're looking around and we're waiting for the grown-ups to take care of it. Where are the grown-ups?
That's us. Yeah, this is now our responsibility. That's right. Others?
I think for me, it's not been, the kind of the doing great things out there. I think for me, what he says on page 3, you can depart in your heart.
Yeah.
It's much more of a kind of smaller, a little more everyday journey on the road, and it's so I don't remember consciously setting these grand goals that I was going to try to go achieve. For me, it's just kind of the everyday. Where am I going today? What's the destination today? In this moment, I tend to live in the present. Whatever I'm presently doing, that's what I'm doing. But I often find that presently I'm on the road somewhere. I'm not quite sure how to articulate that.
Yeah. I was going to write the definitive answer to all these thorny theological questions, is what I was going to do. Then I realized, no.
Maybe one other thing that seems to make it more painful is that while you were pursuing these things, it was, for me, kind of doing it from a perspective that was looking down on other people who had stopped pursuing those things. And so I was sort of artificially propping yourself up for an even greater emotional fall when you start to realize that I'm much more like them than I ever wanted to admit, right? Which is actually okay.
Yeah.
You're normal, but you didn't want to, you wanted to call normal as someone who gave up or was inferior in some way. So it makes it double humbling, humiliating to admit that you're in that same place.
Yeah, they just got their fashion in it. Yeah. So.
Well, and to relate to your point, to solve all these thorny theological problems, wouldn't that be great for the church if you serve them that way? And I think a lot of times we frame our big vision kind of things in that way. This would be so good for others. Not realizing that there's this sort of undercurrent of I'm going to find my identity and satisfaction in doing that as well.
Yeah. No, I think for sure. And we've kind of already eased into the question a little bit, but I think the fact that we've all had this experience in some way means we've all had to deal with this experience of disappointment in some way, some of this realization, and that's the question that he poses. He says, He says, how do we deal with our restlessness? How do we deal with our disappointment? How do we deal with the fact that these things that we thought were going to give us life don't? And he says, there's kind of two, basic approaches that you can do. And the one is this idea. He talks about the road is life. Imagine Sisyphus happy. How many of you have heard that phrase before? Is that from Atlas Shrugged? What is that from? Sisyphus is the guy who's got to roll the stone up. Like this is his judgment. Pointless work, and he just has to exert himself hard to roll the rock up the mountain every day, and then it rolls back down every evening. And he kind of has that as a picture of the road is life. There's no destination. You're not trying to get anywhere. It's just the journey. That's the point. And he says, that's a comforting lie for a second. But ultimately we can't live there. He talks about the fact, he says, we are all compelled to look for home because we were created that way. He said, and so you can try to imagine that the road is life, but he's really not gonna spend a lot of time on that solution, because he said it just doesn't work. We have to find a home. And so he says that we struggle to find a place doesn't change our need for it. In fact, Smith suggests that much of our present restlessness and disappointment is the result of trying to convince ourselves that we're already home. And so we have to. We need a solution. We need a way to live on the road, because that's where we are, but without fooling ourselves into believing that the road is home. Or that any of these stop-offs along the way are home. He says, if you think, even good things, if you think family, or if you think career, or if you think, worldly pleasures, he says, if you think these things are home, if you think that life consists of these things, you're ultimately going to be disappointed. It doesn't make those things bad. But we have to figure out a way to live as pilgrims in this world, knowing that it's not our home. We all sang that song as kids, right? This world is not my home. We kind of know that at some intellectual level. But this book is really about sort of doing the hard spade work of working that out in a very practical way. And again, I think one of the reasons this book resonates with me is because that's just work I need to do. I think Sam asked me 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now. He said, so what are you working on? And I was like, I think I'm working on discontent. I'm restless. I'm discontent with the way things are, and it frustrates me. It makes me, sort of this underlying, frustration or bitterness or whatever, and 4 years later, that hasn't changed. I'm still working on discontent. How do you find rest in the reality that you are on the road, but the road is not your home. So that's kind of what we're doing. And again, as I said, Augustine's Confessions are going to be sort of the roadmap. He's the guide as he's going to walk us through this. And if you look at if you have a copy of the book and you look at the table of contents, you'll see, it's kind of arranged oddly for a book. They're kind of just scattered all over the page. That's kind of intentional because each chapter kind of stands alone. These are meditations, on various aspects. But each one asks a basic question. It says, what do you really want when you want this? So what are the typical things that people look to give them fulfillment and satisfaction and joy and happiness? What are the things people look to fill them up? To use Jeremiah's language. What are the broken cisterns people try to drink from? Where people try to find life. And so he just has a series over here. Freedom. We want to be free. Ambition, success and career, sex, mothers, interesting. Friendship, enlightenment, story. Justice, fathers, death. And we actually are not going to have time to look at all of the chapters in this study. And I'm actually not, if we find ourselves, having worthy discussion, we can spend 2 weeks on one. That's not going to bother me at all. I don't currently plan to spend 2 weeks on any of them. But I really want, we're not going to get through all of them anyway, and I really want us just to wrestle with these things and think about, okay, how is it that we look to these things for life, and then how is it that what is it that we ought to really be looking for? What is that the counterfeit of? What is that the poor substitute for? Because God has created us to long for home. He didn't create us to live on the road. He created us for home. He tells us that He's going to get home for us. And so we are pilgrims here and now. So how do we live as pilgrims here and now and enjoy the journey, find joy in the journey, find rest in the journey, because we know that we have an older brother who is going to bring us home. That's the Derek Thomas's book of the gospel. The gospel. What's the name of the book? The gospel brings you home, or something like that. And that's kind of the overall plan that we're going to be going for. So the way that Smith writes it, he said, "What if you met a saint on the road, and the saint had a map and had spent time at every stop off that lured you and then disappointed you? What if he'd already met the you somehow want to be? What if he could introduce you to a person you've been looking for and lead you to a house with many rooms where a friend would open the door and say, 'Welcome, you can rest here.'" And so that's the picture. But again, I think he provides us with an important caveat as we start this, because he says, but you have to understand that we're going to do this hard work, and it may not take you where you think it's going to take you. All right? He says, because you're still going to be on the road. And that's the key, is we're not learning how to get home. We're learning how to live as pilgrims who have a home that they haven't arrived at yet. And so, the way he says it here, I think it's page 15, he says, one of the gifts Augustine offers us is spirituality for realists. I just love that idea. He says conversion, again, you can think of that as your additional conversion, or you can think of that as sort of your eyes being open to the reality of your spiritual situation. He says, but conversion is not a solution. Conversion is not a magical transport home. And then with his Harry Potter reference, he says, it's not some kind of flu powder to heaven. So if you ever read Harry Potter, you probably don't know what that means, but the flu powder is the powder that the characters in Harry Potter use to transport themselves any way they're thinking of, And he says that's not what this is. Conversion doesn't pluck you off the road. It just changes how you travel. And so he says, Augustine emerged from the waters of baptism as a, what is that, immigrant? Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that. Is immigrant right? It's immigrant, is that right? With a new passport declaring his heavenly citizenship, but he did not immediately enter into heaven. He had miles to go before he'd sleep. But now he knew where home was, and that is what made all the difference. But this idea that this is for spiritual realists, what is it? This idea that okay, we're going to have to find rest as pilgrims. How do you respond to that as you interact with that?
Acceptance is a part of what we learn.
Okay, can you expand on that at all? Accepting.
So if it's acceptance is just the word that popped in my head, but
Yeah.
just accepting your lot in life. Especially when I'm going through work, it's a lot of it is just like I need to do the best I can do and let the chips fall and accept it.
Yeah.
I'll still continue to work at it, but at the same time accept the lot that's been given.
Yeah.
Several things at once, trying to convince it. It's Augustine's book, right? My soul could not find rest till found in me.
Yeah, that's the very beginning of the.
And I never thought I would quote Nietzsche in this sense, but Victor Frankl in his book, sort of for me, whatever the purpose, when he said existential, I loved it. He quotes Nietzsche saying that he that has a why to live can deal with almost anyhow. And I think that being the first and foremost searching for significance, trying to appear to have it all together, and empty cisterns, and one mirage to the next mirage, but never really being home. things that I have planned and wanted to do, and some probably should still pursue, keep moving towards that. There are others that realistically I'm like, that's probably not gonna happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, to accept it, if they're going and doing it all, great, but also just to be that, it's a reminder that those things, good as they may be, that is not, you know, no one will say, oh, well, they couldn't stand to do that before. You know, it's, there's a big time that there's my pastor back home, so I say pursue delayed gratification. I wish I would have heard that 20 years ago, or longer, but yeah, I think that it goes back to, you know, our Reformed theology. So the glory, like we exist for the glory of God, and when I lose sight of that, that's when I'm frustrated. That's when my soul forgets that it can only be content in Him. You know.
Yeah. And what are the things that we're most likely to look for life in? And what are the things? I mean, it's not going to be the same for all of us, but what are the things that attract you, that sort of entice you to run after?
The power to manipulate your surroundings.
Okay. You want to be in control of what's going on around you so that it can't hurt you, or power. I mean, that's what we usually. Absolutely. We want power to control. We want control. We don't want the unexpected. Others?
Success in the sense of that you do something that you think other people respect you for.
Yeah, accolades. Yeah, prestige. I mean, I think that's it's funny, people, I tend to think of myself as someone who doesn't really care what other people think. And in some ways that's true, but only at a very base level. There's other ways where I'm very concerned. I want people, they don't have to like me, but I want them to think I'm impressive. Yeah.
I think I've become aware over the last several years the pull that comfort has for me. Like, I just really want to live a comfortable life.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, comfort has its strength, but for me, comfort is usually the medication I turn to when the other things aren't working out. Like, I don't think I think of comfort as the primary, but when people don't like me, or people are saying bad things about me, or when I can't control my circumstances and all kinds of things are happening that I don't want. That, for me, pleasure is my number one supplement, whether it's food or whatever. Food's high on the list, but that's Sarah and I were talking about that. I was like, I think we comfort you way more often than we're aware. Because Sarah, I mean, I left the house the other night to go get ice cream, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "If I'm honest, I just need ice cream." I was like, "This is comforting, and I know what it is, and I don't care. I'm going to get ice cream." She's like, "Well, we don't have it in the house on purpose." I was like, "I know. That's why I have to go to the store."
I've been sabotaged.
So we had a mechanism in place where I wouldn't do that. And I just totally overrode it by driving down the street to the Food City and getting ice cream. So, others?
I don't think I was aware until reading the J Herd on how being right was such an important thing. It's like, well, even if I can't be right here, I'll create this counter circle of complainers so that at least I'll find a group to be right and back to me.
At least they'll affirm my rightness over here. Yeah, I mean, for me, that fits in with the prestige or the accolades or being right. Because usually that's the kind of thing I want to be praised for, is being right. Having the right opinion about this or the right approach to that. Or others. That makes sense.
Intellectual superiority.
Yeah.
Nice thing.
Autonomy
don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do.
Yeah, or like, I mean, what's the sense of the I can't take care of everything that I need to get to work right now. I'm frustrated, I don't want to burn anybody. And so, and it's true, at the same time, there's a pride element of like, I hate that I feel like that's what I am, you know, and, but, yeah, so it gets a little complicated.
Yeah. Others?
Well, you know, Elmer Eckert, have you ever read Elmer Eckert's?
I don't. Oh, yes, yes.
Love and Respect?
Yeah, love and respect.
I would
Yeah.
say the number one need for men is respect.
Mhm.
And I think the question is how do you get that respect?
Yeah.
I come from being right, I come from work, I come from speech,
Yeah.
in other places.
Yeah, we're seeking that affirmation that you are good, you are worthy, you are. And I think, you know, if we do reflect on, you know, our own sort of internal dialogue, you know, at least I've discovered, and I think it's probably true for you guys as well, that's way more powerful than maybe we want to give credence to. You know, we feel that more strongly than we think. And again, what I love about this book is what he's going to point to is, you know, I mean, love and respect, obviously he's taking that out of Ephesians. He's taking that out of the way God has created us. And so there's actually something right about these desires that we're trying to fulfill. I mean, when Jesus says, hey, don't run after these things, he doesn't say don't run after anything. You know, the point is, hey, you're running after the wrong thing. You know, you're devoting your life to the wrong thing. When Jeremiah tells the Israelites, hey, you know, stop drinking from broken cisterns, it's not because you don't need to drink, it's because there's a fountain of living water over here. You know, and so, you know, again, just recognizing that what is it that you want when you want this? When you're chasing this, there's probably a legitimate desire there. What is it, you know, and how did God intend that desire to be filled? That's what a lot of these chapters are going to be about. And I think that, for me at least, that's part of why I find this book so helpful, because, you know, one approach to desire is Stoicism, just say, well, just stop it, be a Buddhist, be a Stoic, whatever, something Eastern, where you can't be disappointed, you know, if you just don't want anything, you know, but that's not human, you know, that's not the way you were created, and so, you know, Augustine's idea is not that our desires are bad, but our desires are disordered. You know, they're directed towards the wrong ends, and trying to figure out how to redirect them. It won't solve the pain of life. That's the realist part of this. We're still going to be pilgrims, and a lot of those desires are going to go unmet. And so part of what you're going to find out is, hey, that thing you were trying to fulfill, that's actually a desire that's not going to be met in this life, and that you're like, oh, but that's actually hopeful because it points you to the reality, and you can wait. You can wait because you have an inheritance that's coming. That's part of the reality, I think, that Augustine's going to point us to. In fact, Augustine consistently uses, you know, the metaphor. We've been studying Numbers on Wednesday night before this, right? In that reality is the reality that Augustine says we live in. We live between Egypt. If you're a believer, you live between Egypt and Canaan. You know, we sing that song, you know, Jordan's story makes, you know, where it's about the end of life, right? You're about to go over into Jordan, you know, in that case, you know, Jordan is death. You know, you're crossing over into eternity, you know. But that means that right now we live on this side of Jordan. Right now we're not in Egypt anymore. We've been redeemed, but we're not home yet. And just trying to figure that out, I guess, trying to figure out how to make sense of that is going to be, you know, what this book is about. And so there's the reality of, hey, you know, you're not going to be in Canaan, you know, if you figure this out. You're still going to be in the wilderness, but it's going to change the way you live in the wilderness. It's going to be that you're going to learn, you know, what does Paul talk about in Philippians? I mean, that famous passage. You know, he says, I have learned the secret. That's just an interesting way of saying it. I have learned the secret of being content in all situations, whether I have plenty or whether I have want. I have learned the secret. I can remember my dad when I was in college and my brother was in college. My brother had just graduated, and so I still had a couple years of college left. And my dad said to us, he said, JR, my older brother, he said, you're going to have to learn to be content when you have plenty. And Philip, you're going to have to learn to be content when you have want. Because my brother's kind of an ascetic. He's like, he feels guilty if he was my roommate my freshman year in college, and he slept in his car. Like ridiculous, crazy stuff. Like I'm like, what are you like? He almost had to make himself uncomfortable, or he couldn't be comfortable. My dad's like, you're gonna have to learn to be content with plenty, because you feel guilty anytime you have anything. He said, but Philip, you like comfort just a little too much. You are gonna have to learn to be content with want. But that secret is part of what we're trying to learn. And it doesn't, if you're content with one, it doesn't mean you simply have. You still have one. You're still may be going without. But again, it changes the way you do it. So again, a quote here from page 13. Smith writes, "There's joy in the journey, precisely when we don't try to make a home out of our car, so to speak. There is love on the road when we stop loving the road. There are myriad gifts along the way when we remember that it is a way. There is delight in the sojourn when we know where home is." And so again, just this idea that if we can figure out what it is that we really want, what we were created to want, it can set us free from some of the anxiety of trying to find our life in these other things. And so, again, just this word, he says, if you're still at that stage in life where you find the road exhilarating, if you're still convinced the road is life, if life to you feels like an open-top joyride in pursuit of the next experience, then this book is probably not for you. He says, you haven't been disillusioned yet. He said, but if you were there and you realize the emptiness of that, then now is the time to read this book. He said, because that's who this book is for. People who realized that's not the way it's supposed to be. He says, but if the road has beat you down, if the sights have become predictable and tired, and there are nights when you look at your friends in the car and wonder, what are we doing? If you are weary from the chase, broken by the journey, tired of the disappointment, unsettled by a sense that you'd like to find some rest, not in accomplishment, but in welcome, then Augustine might be the straight journey you should travel with. And so anyway, that's where we're at as we start this journey. That can sound a little bit depressing, I guess. It's just like, oh, life has beat you down. If you're crushed, but the reality is that I think we're all there at some point. You cannot. I mean, Paul calls this the present evil age for a reason. All right, in Romans 8, he talks about the fact that we're all groaning in the present. Peter says we are grieved by various trials. That is the reality. And so, if that is your experience, you need to know that you're not unique. You didn't do something wrong. I can remember hearing a sermon on Abraham. This is one of those sermons you hear on the radio, right? And I don't know who the preacher was. It's probably a good thing because he doesn't want to be excited. But he was preaching on Abraham, and his whole point was that God had called Abraham's father first, but Abraham's father was only willing to travel as far as Haran, and therefore he missed out on God's best for his life. And so if God's calling you, don't miss out. Now there's no evidence in the Bible that God called Abraham's father first. Let me just say, he made that up. But it's this sense that that we have somehow missed out. If life's not going well, we've somehow missed out on God's best for your life. And we tend to tell stories about how if you just trust God, things will work out. And the problem with that is that they don't always. Right? I another pastor in town, and he was from a slightly different tradition, and we were trying to do sort of some co-counseling with people who had connections to both our churches. And he kind of pulled me aside, and he's like, I think you need to stop telling these people life is going to be so hard. You're kind of setting them up for failure. You're going to discourage them. They're going to stop trying. I was like, you don't think that the life of a Christian can be hard? He's like, that's not what God wants for His children. And I said, well, and I just kind of started walking through biblical character, and I said, what about Joseph, or what about John the Baptist? I mean, he was right in the center of God's will. He got his head cut off. He was preaching against adultery. He was doing exactly what God wanted him to do. He ended up in jail and get his head cut off. I said, I think Christians' lives can sometimes be hard, but we have to come to the reality of that. But the answer is not resignation. The answer is not, just grit and bear it, and eventually God will bring you home. He said, no, there is actually a way to have joy in the here and now. The book we're doing on Thursday is, kind of a play off of the first question of the Heidelberg Catechism. The first question, what is your only comfort in life and death? It's not just at death. It's not just what's your comfort in death. It is what is your comfort in this life and in death. And of course, the answer is that I belong body and soul to the Lord Jesus Christ, who gave His life as the ransom for mine. He bought me with His precious blood. And because you belong to Him, you now have comfort not just in death. It's not just a hope that this life will eventually end and I get to go. But there's actually a way to have joy in the here and now. It doesn't mean you're not on the road. It doesn't mean you're not in the wilderness. But there's a way for us to begin to figure out how to have joy now. And it's not in security or prestige. It's not in all those things. Yeah.
It's a confidence, like it says at the very end of that question, that essentially there's going to come a day where everything that happened to me on the road will be seen as a part of my salvation. Like we journey with that kind of confidence that all the good things, all the bad things, it was all a part of Him saving us.
Yeah, it's part of the work He's doing and fitting us for heaven. So, well, let me end with this. If you have a copy of the book, open up to the table of contents. As I said, we're not going to have time to do all of the chapters. I'm going to do the first 3 chapters, freedom, ambition, and sex, because those all really resonate with me. And I think they'll resonate with you as well. But as you look at those others, mothers, how to be dependent, it says. Friendship, how to belong. Enlightenment, how to believe. Story, how to be a character. Justice and the fathers and death. I wonder, any of those that just resonate with you as far as the framework of the books that you want to make sure we get to?
Not to be more of a death thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
That's a reality,
Yeah, so the one on death. So if you look at the chapter on mothers, what do I want when I want to leave? How to be dependent. You're talking about we want to be independent, we want to be autonomous. That's something we think we want. He's like, what do you really want when you're wanting that? Do you really want autonomy? It's interesting. Again, just do a plug for the group we're doing on Thursdays. The book we're reading on Thursdays. The whole premise of that book really revolves around the idea that belonging to yourself, autonomy, is not. It's not the prize you think it is. It will actually kill you. It will crush you. It's a burden. You're not big enough to bear the weight of your own freedom. And so, anyway, that chapter, the one on death, friendship. What do I want when I want to belong?
The Tommy thing I had an asthma pastor when I was a kid. I remember him saying, because every moment when you realize he was kind of saying, he understood that he was not created to be general manager of the universe.
Any other thought? I mean, again, we don't have to decide right now. I just want to get your feedback on, kind of what, and if you don't have the book yet, you can kind of peruse through the chapters later. Because just to give you a heads up on what we're doing here, we're kind of, like I said, I'm skipping over the first 3 chapters. We're kind of skipping over those 3 tonight. And we're going to dive into what I think is the meat of the book, starting with chapter 4 next week. Because we don't have enough weeks to cover all of the chapters. So, the first 2 weeks are pretty much set. We're going to do those first 3, but then after that, we can skip around a little bit, depending on.
The friendship one was interesting.
Yeah.
Because I've been reading some of Sebastian Junger's books about the Spanish War, and I'll read the tribe, and it's kind of like the belongingness of humans, if you will.
Yeah. What do you want when you want to belong?
The subtitle for fathers has me curious.
Okay. Yeah.
Fathers, how do you go in?
Yeah, let me find that chapter here.
Wasn't what I was expecting for a subtitle.
What do I want when I want to be embraced?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think there, when you, how do you broken as the idea of, the father is the one we look to affirm. And say, you're okay, you're good, you're my boy. And when we fall and break ourselves, when we fall short, how do you deal with that? You're looking for when you mess up early, you're looking for a father to tell you it's okay. I think that's what he's getting at in that chapter. So you're looking for someone to say, "You're my boy, you're okay." So anyway, like I said, we don't have to decide that tonight, but I just want to give you kind of a little bit of at least a warning that we're not going to cover everything. But there's again. If you don't have a copy of the book, I think our discussions will be profitable whether you have a copy of the book or not, whether you're able to read it or not. So it was pointed out to me yesterday. There's a lot of book studies going on right now. There's a book study. Thursday people are reading the book. Sunday school's reading the book. Wednesday nights reading the book. We didn't do that on purpose. We weren't. We just didn't really think about it. So I will not at all be offended if you're like, I just can't do the reading for that class. But I encourage you to come anyway. I think the discussions will be profitable, whether you're able to do the reading or not. Because I'll try to pull out quotes and whatnot. And I do want it to be a discussion, and to really focus on how these things affect us, how we sort of live out this story. I don't want to just be information down the road. I do want to be maybe a little bit more existential in some of my classes. Where we're really talking about our own experience. It's like, hey, I've lived that. I've been there. How does this help me, wrestle with, my feelings in the way that I'm experiencing life? So, all right. Final thoughts or questions or comments?
From what you said tonight, and I've read chapters of the other 2 books, you guys, I think there's an amazing cross-pollination of those 3 books.
Yeah.
And whether that was your plan and Sam's plan, or just divine concurrence, because it's all.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, this book and the other, and the You Are Not Your Own book, we weren't planning those to go together, but it's just kind of where I'm at. And so I think the books that are resonating with me right now are books that are kind of touching these subjects. And then Sam's the one doing Gentle and Lowly. I've actually read about half of Gentle and Lowly, but I do think I think these are all 3 really powerful books. So I'm looking forward to the studies myself. So others, final words. Let me close this in prayer. Father, we thank you for your mercy and your grace to us this week. We thank you that you give us books like this that we can read together and meditate upon. And Father, I just pray that you would be with each one of the men in this group, that you would that you would be at work in our lives and in our hearts through this study and through these meditations, and that you would be using them more and more to equip us to live as faithful pilgrims in this present evil age, Father. But we recognize that we were not created to live on the road. We were not created to find our life in the various stop-offs that are there. But Father, that if we know where home is, we can actually begin to enjoy them for themselves rather than putting the weight of our identity and purpose on them. And I just pray that you would help us to do that, that you would lead us into your truth, and that you would sanctify us by your truth. All to praise you, Lord.